Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today at the Columbia School of Social Work, Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion's Black History Month panel. My name is Chris One, he, them pronouns. I am of East Asian descent. I have about slightly tan caramel skin with light black short facial hair, beard, and mustache, as well as hair. And I am currently wearing a silk blue and white and silver traditional Korean ceremonial robe called a hanbok. And I'm using a virtual background of the Columbia School of Social Work's entrance, as well as my pronoun badge, which is on my top right. And I'll be passing off the mic to our moderator, Dean Karma Lowe, for her introduction.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name is Karma Lowe. I'm the Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement. And I'm super excited for today's panel. I want to give a quick shout out to one of our panelists, Yomi Rong, who has help push us in a more accessible environment. We have live captioning available today, and Chris's visual description of himself, which I'm going to do as well, was something else that Yomi suggested for us to again sort of further create an inclusive environment. So I am a Black woman. I have sort of medium to medium dark skin tone. I wear black rimmed glasses that are sort of rectangular in shape. I have sort of curly, wavy hair that's parted on one side. And I'm wearing a black shirt with a very sort of multicolored, multi-patterned scarf around my neck. And I just want to welcome you all. I'm going to pass the mic back. Oh, and I'm coming to you from, I'm a guest on unceded Lenape land. And so I want to thank the elders as well as the Lenape folks for allowing me to come to you from this space today.
Thank you very much for that, Karma, and for the land acknowledgement of the Lenape peoples, who we thank, at least in terms of where I am located, for allowing us to speak here and for gathering. And in order for us to set the grounding space for the panel, I would like to do a land acknowledgement that applies to wherever you may all occupy as participants. We respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we gather is occupied, unceded, and seized territory. We honor and give thanks of gratitude to the Lenni Lenape and Wappinger, the ancestral traditional stewards of this land throughout the generations, who allow the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories, and the settler university to occupy these lands, known in Eurocentric epistemology as the USA and New York City. We pay respects to their elders past and present. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hopes of a better life. And some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all events. The panel objective, part of a Heritage Narratives series that honors folks' different affinity groups, has an objective of such: for exploring intersectional identities to share and honor alternative, counter, and authentic narratives to the dominant narratives that perpetuate the stigmatization and oppression of Black and African American identifying folks. In terms of the structure and technical logistics for participants, in a moment we will get started on the discussions on the panel's main themes, celebrating Black heritage via identity, belonging, and activism. Panelists will then respond to questions submitted by audience members. Given our limited time, please understand that not all questions may be addressed during the panel. We encourage you, however, to share any reflections and expansions on the questions you may have via the chat box or the Q&A. In terms of our community agreements, We ask everyone to respect yourselves, others, and the environment. There may be topics that may be triggering, especially in regards to oppression and colonization. And in that case, please feel free to take care of your needs or to step out if you need to do so. This is a celebration of Black heritage for both panelists and participants alike. Thus, there will be active moderation to prevent violence of all kinds. Lastly, in efforts to be as inclusive as possible and to hold ourselves accountable, we ask that you submit any feedback to our office at bit.ly/DEI feedback, all in caps, and I'll be typing this into the chat box shortly, or contact us at swdei@columbia.edu. Thank you very much for setting that space with me. And now I will turn the mic over back to Carmela.
Thanks, Chris. I'm super excited to give some brief introductions of our panelists, and then we're going to jump right in. And I want to just remind our panelists that this is really a conversation among folks, so please feel free to talk to each other, to rip off each other, to ask other questions. And even though I'm the moderator, I'm just here to sort of set the stage, and feel free to take over without me. And I also want to thank you for being here. It is an honor, honestly, to have you all in this space together, and I am just have so much gratitude for the many identities that you represent and what you bring to this space. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to everyone Angelica Lindsay Ali, AKA the Village Auntie, trademarked. Angelica is a community scholar, certified sexual health educator, storyteller, and professional dancer. Angelica is certified as a sexual health educator and wellness coach, and a recognized authority in sexual health, intimacy cultivation in Islamic marriage, and emotional well-being. She teaches women about sexual health and pleasure from both an African and Islamic perspective. With more than 20 years of experience in women's wellness, Lindsay Ali draws upon her clinical, cultural, and religious training to educate women about sex and intimacy from an Islamic lens. And as I mentioned before, she's also a professional dancer, which I have a feeling she'll touch on a little bit later. Next, we have Devin Lowe, founder and executive director of the Black Trans Travel Fund. Devin's also an actor, producer, and facilitator. Devin's a community organizer invested in the liberation of Black and trans people from the constraints of capitalism, white supremacy, and cis heteropatriarchy. As a queer transgender man, he holds a passion for moving resources to his community and is committed to helping to create a world where Black trans people are not just seen, but are respected, protected, supported, and valued. And as an actor and media producer, he's worked on multiple productions that focus on the lived experiences of trans people. The Reverend Kendra Frazier, who is a CSSW alum, woohoo, 2014. Kendra is the founder and CEO of Kind Consulting Incorporated. Kind, an acronym for Knowing Yourself in Need of Devotion. Kind offers trauma-informed care through a variety of services, from clinical therapy for individuals, families, and couples, to trauma-informed training for corporate entities and ecclesial communities, as well as spiritual direction. Kendra was most recently the founding executive director of the Hope Center, a free mental health facility in central Harlem of New York City, and formerly served as the associate pastor of congregational care and wellness at First Corinthian Baptist Church. Kendra is a spiritual activist, filmmaker, and thought leader, and both she and Devin were recently featured on the 2020 Root 100 list of most influential African Americans. And next, Yomi Rong, a disability justice activist and dreamer and former executive director of the Center for Independent Living. Yomi is an Oakland, California-based consultant, trainer, activist, and disability justice dreamer. She's a former, as I mentioned before, executive director of the renowned Center for Independent Living, the nation's first cross-disability service and advocacy organization run by disabled people. She currently works in healthcare compliance, where her role is to ensure full access to quality medical care for people with disabilities. And with that, I'm going to start with Yomi for our first question. If you could come on and tell us, how do you identify, and how do your identities inform your work?
Hey, thank you. Good morning. Well, it's morning where I am. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I want to, before I get started, offer a visual description, and I want to thank Karma and Chris for modeling that for us. I am an African-American disabled woman. I identify as a little person because my physical disability causes dwarfism. I use a power wheelchair for mobility. I'm wearing silver wire rim glasses. I have milk chocolate skin, long dark hair. I'm wearing a light gray sweater, and I'm zooming in from my office, my home office, and behind me are some bookshelves, which I describe as organized chaos. I am joining you from occupied Ohlone territory, also known as Oakland, California, but I am a native of the Bronx, New York, the best borough in the world. So I rep the Bronx everywhere I go. Happy to be here. And yeah, I see Devin is like, yeah, are you from the Bronx too? Let's rep it. So I think your question was about identity. Yeah, I see in the chat, BX all day. Sorry,
Yeah, our
crazy.
identities inform all of our work. So
Absolutely. So thank you for asking that question. It has taken me a really long time to, and I'm still working through, how do I identify, how do I show up? Um, I will just openly disclose that I am fast approaching 50 years old. Black don't crack. I know I probably don't look like it, but 50 is very near on the horizon for me. And it has really been, I would say, in the last decade that I have embraced and really engaged with my identity as a Black disabled woman. So, there were many years sort of in my upbringing when I had such intense internalized ableism and because I was always usually like the only disabled person, either in my school, um, in my immediate family, in my social circles, that I did not have role models who were disabled. There were no images of people that looked like me in popular culture or media. Um, and so I didn't have that firm identity. I had no one to look to for that identity. And it wasn't until I started actually working in disability rights spaces, in cross disability rights spaces where we come together from a spectrum of disabilities, that I started to learn more about disability identity as a political identity and and as a point of pride. So that's how I identify. That's how I show up as a Black disabled woman. I don't check any of my identities or oppressions at the door. This is who I am fully and wholly. And that identity really informs everything I do, the way that I move through the world, the way that I work, both in my professional career. In healthcare and also in the organizing and political and community building spaces where I am. So check. Thank you.
thanks, Yomi. Devin, you're up next on my screen. So how do you identify and how do your identities inform your work?
All right, thank you, Karma, and hello, everyone. Super happy to be here. Thank you. To give a quick visual description, I am a light-skinned Black transgender man. I am currently sitting on my living room couch, which is a dark brown leather. I have a what's it called? Kind of an abstract painting on the wall right behind me, behind my left shoulder. I have curly dyed blonde hair with the dark brown roots poking out of it, and I am wearing a light pink polo. I also have a beard. It's got kind of a longer goatee area, and I have a small diamond stud in my right nose. So thank you for that. And as far as my identities and how they inform my work, like I said, I'm a Black trans man. I'm also pansexual. And as Karma mentioned, I am a fervent anti-capitalist, and I'm also an abolitionist. And I think that my intersections really inform each other, in the sense that the reason that I am an anti-capitalist and an abolitionist is partly because I am a Black trans man. And I recognize the ways that white supremacy and capitalism are tied. I recognize the way that white supremacy and the carceral state are inherently tied. And I as a trans man, I see the ways in which colonization and the gender binary and the subjugation of gender expansive Black and non-white people, period, is really all tied to that. As far as my work is concerned, I'm most passionate about, well, the liberation of Black trans people, as has already been stated, which I really believe it really encompasses the liberation of everyone. You know, like everyone will be free when Black trans people are free. And so that's why I do what I do.
Thanks, Devin. The Reverend Kendra, you could share about your identities and how it's informed your work.
Thank you, Karma. It is such a gift to be present with Yomi, Devin, and Angelica. Thank you all for the work that you do. To give a quick visual description of myself, these visual descriptions just make me smile, and I can see you all. I am I would say a little darker than milk chocolate, African-American woman with plum colored lipstick on, a very short haircut, long brown earrings, and a white sweater on. And in my background on my wall, there's an African mask and a map of the world and a Ghanaian wood art frame. And in terms of my identity, I also give honor to the Catawba people who are native to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I am currently and where I'm from. I am the great granddaughter of Maggie Cochran, the great granddaughter of Carrie Nell, and the granddaughter of Rogers Glover Sr. and Harriet Glover. I come from a long line of medicine women and men, of hoodoo practitioners. I am same gender loving, queer woman. I am also a spiritual leader and find my religious footing currently as an ordained Baptist clergy woman. Although I believe in the work of interfaith. In terms of how my identities inform the work that I do, I have to always acknowledge that I come from folks who have been here before and who have done the work of healing and transformation and resistance in some really powerful ways to remind myself that I don't do this work alone. And Black folks are the highest, are the population that has the highest attendance of church. And I recognize in my own work as a mental health practitioner that church and other religious institutions has problematized the way that people who look like me access care through mental health support. And I recognize it in my own family. It is laden with alcoholism and other challenges, adverse challenges that impact how my family members show up and how those that I work with show up. And I believe that the zip code to health paradigm is real, where your zip code determines your health outcomes. And I'm committed to doing the work for folks that look like me to be able to have access to mental health resources to aid them in their own healing and wholeness.
Thanks, Kendra. Angelica, could you please share with us how you identify across your identities and how that informs your work?
Good morning. It's morning where I am also. I'm speaking to you from Laveen, Arizona, also known as Comatque, which is the land of the Tohono O'odham Nation. For visual descriptor, I'm a Black woman. I think I'm medium tone, but my children say I'm not. I'm probably the color of tea with too much milk in it. I am wearing a hijab, which is a scarf that covers both my head, neck, and shoulders. It is forest green with tan accents. It's in a mudcloth print. I am wearing makeup. I am sitting in front of a white wall on a couch with artwork depicting Black women behind me. I identify as a Black woman. I don't identify as African American, and we'll get into that a bit more later, although I am an American citizen, born and raised in the city of Detroit, Michigan. Like Yomi rides hard for the Bronx, I ride hard for Detroit as well. And that informs really everything about me. I always tell people, if you don't know I'm from Detroit within the first 15 minutes of talking to me, I wasn't really interested in the conversation. I am a tall, plus sized woman, which also informs a lot of what I do. And I'm a Muslim. I don't put any qualifiers on that either. I was raised in a Christian household and converted to Islam at the age of 23. I am a founder of a women's movement that's dedicated to cultivating a paradigm shift in the way that women experience spiritual spaces, both from a physical standpoint, a tactile standpoint, and a visual standpoint. My work is informed by my identities because as a cisgender heterosexual woman, I understand the privilege that I have, and I understand how that privilege has been undermined by the excessive use of patriarchal definitions in spiritual spaces. Everything that I do is focused on Blackness. I don't care if the person that I'm talking to is not Black. My African worldview is my gaze. I do not come from a Western gaze. I do not come from a male gaze at all. So everything that you need to know about me is encapsulated in the fact that I'm a Black Muslim woman from Detroit, and that informs everything that I do.
Thanks, Angelica. I'm going to ask, can you say more about identifying as Black versus African American?
Sure. So I've never been, although I am proud to be the descendant of African people who were captured in chattel slavery and brought to the continent of the United States, I've never been patriotic for America in the way that the term African American would ascribe. I am proud to be, from the United States because of my people, not because of the country itself. I understand that as a woman who is currently living on land that was occupied, I grew up in Michigan on land that was occupied. I have ancestors who were a part of those communities. And my grandfather, in fact, grew up in Mexico. I don't include Latinx as a part of my identity for a variety of reasons, including anti-Blackness that I've experienced within that community. But I identify as Black because I see myself as a person who is able to engage in a variety of spaces with people across the diaspora. And I think when I put American on an identity, it centers me in a way that makes me uncomfortable, because it is the assumption is that I have a certain amount of privilege that I don't always have access to. I've lived internationally, both in Ghana, West Africa, where my husband is from, and in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and having to explain to people that I'm American, but I'm not American began to be a bit more uncomfortable. And Blackness for me is something that binds me to people from Trinidad, from Somalia, from Australia, from London, from wherever people are. So I'm a firm believer in the diaspora, and I do ascribe to the political ideology of Pan-Africanism. So that's why I identify myself as Black first and foremost.
Thanks, Angelica. I'm wondering how other folks feel about the term Black versus African American. And please feel free to riff off each other. Jump in, Yomi.
I love that you said that. My mom is from Mississippi, but my father is from Guyana, South America. So I am first generation on my father's side. And I never felt, I always felt like I was straddling sort of these two worlds, this like very American, Southern, rooted in both Black and Indigenous culture in the United States, but also this quasi West Indian culture, which is like a whole nother thing. It's a whole nother experience. And because my father was first generation, he had some really unique perspectives on America and the way that he experienced this culture. So that really resonates with me, that you're not, it does, I think, frame identity and how you show up when you identify as African American, when you put that American there, when you tag that on versus Black. Because for me, I'm trying to connect more with just my place in the diaspora. And because I have people who are not born in this country and I still have relatives in South America, it feels like sometimes I'm straddling sort of two worlds.
Yeah, and I will just say that likewise, I also do not identify with the term African American. I do identify as Black for reasons that were already stated. And also very much, I mean, Blackness is political to me. I mean, thinking about the conditions that exist across the diaspora, fighting for Black trans liberation, I also hold a Pan-Africanist politic and a socialist communist politic. So I am not a fan of America whatsoever. So definitely Black is the more appropriate identifier personally.
I'm a both and type of person. I identify as African American. I also identify as Black. And I believe it is because there's a unique experience that I have as a Black person living in America. And I'm remembering my grandfather, who was a butler for the same white family for over 50 years, who helped sustain his family based on the things that he had access to, limited access to, 6 children, because he was here. And so that is something that I carry with me. I also identify with the term Black because that is what people see when they first see me, is my Blackness. And so yeah, that's where I am in terms of the name.
Thank you all. And this next question is basically open to anyone. But from your respective intersectional identities, how have you been treated historically as you walk through the world, particularly in this country, but also, Angelica, you mentioned traveling a lot abroad. And so how have you seen the way other folks treat you based on your identities?
Okay, I'll jump in. It's interesting. Growing up in Detroit, I grew up in the Detroit, not the gentrified Detroit that exists today, but I grew up in the 99% Black Detroit with Coleman Young as my mayor, and it always shocks me when people say I didn't have a Black teacher until 5th grade. I can count the number of white teachers I had. That's how many Black teachers I had growing up. So I grew up in an environment where I was not at all an anomaly. And Detroit is a very politically astute and culturally relevant space that I don't think gets enough shine in terms of its impact on Black culture, not just in America, but worldwide. So I grew up in this cauldron of positive Blackness. And I didn't really experience any difference in treatment until I went to college. I went to Ann Arbor, University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, 40 minutes away. And then I was no longer Angelica. I was the Black girl with short hair. I was different. I moved to Phoenix, Arizona. It was like, being in the Twilight Zone. Everything was so different. Everything that I knew about how Blackness operated came from a Midwestern lens, a very Detroit-centric lens, and Black people in Phoenix, operate a bit differently. But when I went overseas, that's when I really began to become more rooted in my Blackness. I was treated very well in Saudi Arabia, extremely well. People could hear the Midwestern, lilt in my English, and they automatically catapulted me to the top of the social sphere. And I had a conversation with someone who said that, in Saudi Arabia, Americans are put very, very high in terms of, socialization. People in the West think that we hate Americans, but we don't. We really love you. And you speak English so well. And it wasn't you speak English so well for a Black person. It was just you speak English so well. Because of my complexion, because I am lighter skinned, when I would go out, I could be mistaken for someone from Oman, someone from Kuwait, someone from Saudi Arabia. And so I began to see privilege very, very differently. It was the first time that I ever got to experience privilege. My husband is Ghanaian. He's very dark. My children are very dark skinned as well. And I got to see the difference in treatment that they experienced. And so that really opened my eyes to how I needed to operate differently and mobilize my privilege in that space to help other people. And then we went to Ghana, and I was called Obroni. And I know a lot about Ghanaian culture. I do not speak the language that Obroni comes from, but I know Obroni means white person. And so when the woman who was selling me cooking utensils on the street was speaking and called me Obroni and doubled the price, I knew that that was a different kind of experience that I was having on the continent and how I was treated and people thinking that I was Arab. So I think that the way that I have been treated really depends on who I'm around and where I am. But it's something that I've always been keenly aware of since about 2001. I've been aware of how I can either access my privilege and use it for my benefit, or how I can use it for the benefit to help other people. But it's something that I'm always aware of when I move in spaces. And, you know, to talk about how I'm treated in Muslim spaces, being a Black Muslim woman would take too much time. But more often than not, in spaces with people who share the same faith, I am viewed as a convert, which I am, but I'm viewed as being someone who doesn't know as much, who needs to be taught, who is somehow doing things that are haram or forbidden just by virtue of being a Black person.
Yeah, I guess I can jump in next. And thank you, Angelica, for that. Let's see, the question was around like how we're treated historically, right? Well, I will start off by saying that similar to Angela, I do have quite a bit of privilege as someone who is lighter skinned. That being said, as a Black trans person, Black trans people have historically and to this day still continue to face social and systematic violence across the board. We're dealing with disproportionate rates of job insecurity and harassment at our jobs. I know I personally have been harassed at work. I've been working to where coworkers are calling me a woman to the point where I had to leave. I know a lot of folks who, especially a lot of women, can't even get a job, much less if they're getting harassed at the job. We have to deal with housing discrimination, housing insecurity. So many Black trans folks that I know are currently homeless, currently navigating the shelter system, which has just become even worse with COVID-19 ravaging our systems. We're dealing with inadequate medical care. Myself, I've dealt with discriminatory therapists, people who are doctors who are just unaware about how to deal with my body as a trans person, navigating HRT and surgeries and things like that. I know folks who like pregnant trans men who are being harassed, going to gynecologists, telling them that this place is not for them. So things like that are a really serious issue. Of course, we're being harassed and facing like violence, not just by law enforcement, which is prevalent throughout the Black community, as we all know. I've definitely been harassed by police. I've been handcuffed at school for trying to use the men's restroom when I was like not so many years on testosterone. I've been arrested at protests, like Black Lives Matter protests, and have had police like snicker and harass me, trying to like laugh about where they're going to put me and so like things like that. So that's a prevalent issue. We literally just had the Walking While Trans ban cleared, but before there were trans people being targeted on the street as sex workers for having condoms on them, things like that. So there's a lot of issues, and most of all, I mean, Black trans people are being murdered at disproportionate rates. You look at the list of trans people that have been killed year after year, and you will see countless lists of predominantly Black trans people, and most often predominantly Black trans women specifically. So In fact, just last week on the 4th, Thursday, there was a woman, Alexis Braxton in Florida, a Black trans woman who was recently murdered, and that's still being investigated. And she wasn't the only one this year. So there have been multiple Black trans women that have been murdered this year. So we can see that this is still an ongoing crisis in the community, the Black community, and the trans community at large.
So I guess I'll jump in. When I think about how I've been treated historically based on my identities, the first thing that comes to mind is this story that my mom tells me every now and again about how I came to her telling her that I wanted to look like Heather. Heather was a very light-skinned girl who was one of my best friends growing up. And somewhere along the way, I internalized the message that my dark skin wasn't worthy enough as a 7-year-old. And I can remember at 12 seeking external validation from people who looked like me through being voted as homecoming princess in 7th grade. And so I feel like colorism definitely impacted me in my adolescent years. I'm also a person that identifies as queer, not only in terms of sexuality, but in terms of the way that I think about things, particularly theologically, and in very traditional fundamentalist Christian spaces. Sometimes I've not been received well. I can remember recently there was an invitation extended for me to speak at a very traditional denominational space. And I was wondering, have they ever heard me speak before? Because I don't know if they're going to welcome some of my lens in terms of sexuality. And sure enough, it was not welcomed. And so that is something that I have experienced. And living in Brazil in 2009 and interning at a Baptist church there, I was kicked out of a home for being queer. And it was devastating. And at the same time, I'm glad that it happened because it opened up conversation within the church that I was serving in for that has placed them to be the first church in their region to be welcoming and affirming to LGBTQ folks. I've also experienced being in clinical pastoral education and working with colleagues of diverse ethnicities and this double consciousness of having to exist within how I speak and how I write. And a white colleague, a white male colleague, accused me of plagiarism because I didn't speak how I wrote. He was very impressed by my writing, which was very interesting, and it was very upsetting to me. In terms of working in a church space, when I served in the spiritual community in Harlem, there was what my friend Nikki Young, Dr. Nikki Young refers to as hypervisibility and visibility, where even though I was the first queer and out pastor of the church, there still was a way that the leadership would be like at times, don't talk so much about being gay. Even though I would mention it like somebody would mention having a child or being married to a partner. So it's been very interesting to negotiate my identities within the various fields that I work within.
Thanks. So I guess I'll pull up the rear here and talk about how I have experienced. Can you frame the question again so that I make sure that I'm on track?
Sure. I mean, essentially just considering your intersectional identity, sort of how have you been historically and even present day treated, just from that perspective and your lens?
So to answer that question, I would like to offer a definition of ableism that I think is right on, spot on by Talila A. Lewis. And then when I give that definition of ableism, it'll be easier to understand how I experience the world. So ableism is a system that places value on people's bodies and minds based on a societally constructed idea of normalcy, intelligence, excellence, and productivity. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in anti-Blackness, eugenics, colonialism, and capitalism. This form of systemic oppression leads to people and society determining who is valuable and worthy based on a person's appearance and or their ability to satisfactorily reproduce, produce, excel, and behave. You do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. So I think that that is a really apt and powerful definition of ableism. And as some of the disability justice luminaries and thinkers that I learned from, specifically Patty Byrne and our ancestor Stacey Milburn have discussed, like ableism is the vein of my existence. Ableism is the undercurrent of every form of judgment or oppression that I experience as a disabled Black woman in the culture. For me, because I have a very obvious and apparent physical disability, that is like the most immediate identifier. But also I experience a level of privilege in my disabled body mind because I am very small. People sometimes experience me as being cute and unassuming and non-threatening. And so while I have not been subjected to the many forms of physical violence and harassment that so many of my disabled peers, especially Black disabled folks, have experienced, it is still something that I contend with in sort of every aspect of my life, in my professional world, in my personal relationships, in my familial relationships. And some of the biggest harm, and I would say psychological and spiritual and emotional violence that I've experienced as a disabled Black women has been from religious institutions, very specifically from the Black church, which is really steeped and rooted in ableism. And that is this perspective that I am not whole, that my very physicality is somehow an abomination or a glitch in the matrix, that I will not be a whole person unless I am healed of my disability, or unless and until I die and go to some ableist heaven where I'm, 5'7" and running around, and that my legs work in a certain way, that our bodies work in a certain way, that we speak in a certain way, that we learn in a certain way, that we think in a certain way, and that we won't achieve that until we're in an afterlife. And I do identify as Christian. I have a very special, intimate relationship with my Creator. But I firmly believe that I am made in God's image. I don't believe that I'm a mistake. I don't believe that I will be made whole at some later point. I believe that my wholeness and my liberation is it's within me, and it's attainable and achievable now. And it starts with me decolonizing my mind and me addressing really I call myself a disability justice dreamer because it's an aspiration for a future in which all bodies, right, are valued and respected, where we embrace wholeness, that it's an anti-capitalist politic. It's intersectional, of course, but it's really rooted in collective liberation, cross-disability movement organizing, and leadership of those most impacted. So it is both a political framework. I am a student of it. I am a practitioner. I am still learning, and I'm still learning how to embody that. And for like, what's interesting to me about Black history, like a lot of people, remember when Black Panther came out and everybody was like, Wakanda, right? We were like, that was the future state we all wanted to get to. Well, I didn't see nobody that looked like me in Wakanda either. So, where are the Black disabled bodies in this future that we all those of us who are quote unquote woke and are striving for liberation, where do I fit into that? Where do my peers fit into that? Where does my community fit into that? And so I don't want to construct a separate reality or a separate future for us. I want something that's inclusive and that is whole. So we're not there. And a lot of that means interrogating and analyzing all of these so-called liberation spaces where people are doing the work and saying, you know, do you have an analysis of ableism? Are you able to confront that? Are you able to because ableism and colonialism and white supremacy, these are all like, there's like this interplay, there's a nexus connection between all of it. And so I would just say, you know, our organizations, our movements, our striving is not liberatory, and it's not woke if it's ableist, if it doesn't include all body minds. And so that's kind of the way I've always experienced every aspect of my life. And then the last thing I will say is, and because this has just stayed with me, a few years ago, I visited the Whitney Museum in Louisiana. And it's a museum that is, the goal is to tell the story of slavery from the perspective of slaves. And it's a really emotionally powerful experience, beautifully curated. And as I was engaging with the museum and traveling around the grounds, and I was really connecting with who I felt were my ancestors and the oppression, and just really trying to understand historical and generational trauma. At the end of the tour, I was able to meet the chief curator, and we were talking, and I said, and they were saying, you know, one of their goals for the future was to have a specific exhibit that explored the experience of Black slave women, because Black women experienced slavery in a very different and specific and violent way that was separate from Black men. And it was very unique. And so I said, what was the Black disabled slave experience? And it was like, you know, crickets. And it's because people, I think sometimes when they think about disability, they see us as objects of pity or charity or scorn, but they don't sort of see us across the spectrum of time. Disability is part of human diversity. We have always existed, but we have not, our stories haven't always been told. We haven't always been represented. And I'm like super curious, like what happened to the disabled slaves? Did they still work? I was looking at the slave cabins, none of them had ramps. Like, what was the physical access like? What were their lives like? Were they killed? Did they just go away? How were they treated? What happened when somebody was either born disabled or acquired disabilities? I mean, we say in disability community, we, in terms of the culture, we are all either disabled or temporarily able-bodied, because if we live long enough, most of us will acquire disabilities. Right. So like what happened and what was that experience like? And like he had no answers. And he was like, that would actually be really interesting. So I'm really interested in seeing us across time and seeing how what was that striving and resilience look like? I know that I have Crip ancestors. And I love, like, Kendra, the way you named some of your elders and ancestors, like I come from this person, this person, this. I think that it's just so beautiful, and I'm going to steal that and start doing it. I'm going to start naming my grandma, grandpas, like all the people that I come from, who raised me up and who loved me and whose prayers and intentions are still protecting me and guiding me. But I also know that I have Crip ancestors, and I want to know their stories too.
Thank you, Yomi, all of you. As you were all talking, and I'm also going to steal that, by the way, Kendra. So it's like we stole from Yomi's for today. I'm going to steal from yours moving forward. I love the collective moving forward. As you're all talking, I'm thinking about, you know, belonging and the sense of belonging. And I'm wondering, what does that mean for you? And especially when you were just talking, Yomi, you talked a lot about all these spaces where you don't feel like you belong because you're sort of the invisible, and even Kendra used the term, the hypervisibility of invisibility from Dr. Nikki Young, which I thought was incredibly powerful. So for anyone to jump in and just, if you could talk about your sense of belonging, like what does that mean to you?
All right, I guess I'll jump in really quickly. To keep it short, yeah, as I have already stated, Blackness is very political to me. But with that being said, to be Black is to be limitless. You know, I believe it's being able to call on ancestors that stretch back across all of time. You know, it means not being confined by the limitations of white supremacy's attempted indoctrination. It means, man, I mean, it means being part of this particular history of resistance. I like to quote the Anarchana Turn, which talks about being grounded in the Black radical principles of solidarity, study, spirit, and struggle. And those all really ring true to me when I think about my identity as a Black person and how I navigate the world.
I would say for me, being Black means coming from a long legacy of innovation, creativity, resistance, and wonderment. I think about just a couple of generations prior to me in terms of my grandfather working for the same white family, how he had to do some things to survive. One of those things included responding to a bell every time food was ready, a bell when breakfast was ready, a bell when lunch was ready, a bell when dinner was ready, and he would have to go through the back door. I think about the ways that he had to make himself small so he could survive in white spaces in ways that I now won't, because of the sacrifices that he, my grandmother, my mother, my father, and generations before me have made in order for me to be able to show up in a predominantly white denomination as a Black woman clergy person, in order for me to be able to show up as a same gender loving person in church spaces that don't believe that me being queer is a gift from God, that don't believe that I should be able to preach and be gay. I believe that being Black for me means that I have the opportunity in each moment to tap into the magic that is in me on a DNA level in each new day. And so that gives me a lot of hope for where we are as Black people and for where we're headed.
Can you restate the question so that I can make sure?
Yeah, just wanted to get people's sense of belonging. When you think about being Black and, you know, spaces where you feel like I belong, like what does that mean to you?
For me, and I mean, and this may not be the best answer, but it's my answer. I belong to myself first and foremost. I have a strong sense of self-identity. I have a strong connection to my creator, regardless of faith. I have the same connection to my creator that I had when I was in the church as when I'm in the mosque. And because I am so self-assured, I'm comfortable belonging anywhere because I have my people with me because I am my own person. I am, as Toni Morrison said, I am my best thing. You know, I can move about in spaces where people feel that I shouldn't be. I work in public health, in HIV and STD prevention. I've worked in this field since 2003. And because of the work that I do, I'm often in spaces with people who identify as queer, as non-binary, as transgender, and I'm completely comfortable in those spaces as a cisgender heterosexual woman, because me knowing that I belong to myself, I also have to honor each other person's personhood. I have to honor their right and their ability and their presence and the beauty of them just existing. So I'm not uncomfortable around anyone else. And I think that's important when we talk about belonging, because when I hear belonging, it makes me feel like, makes me think of cliques, you know, people who have their, you know, specialized groups. I don't play that. Like I don't move in spaces like that. So I think me being very centered in my purpose and who and what I am allows me to also honor and appreciate other people's purpose, their presence, and it helps me to support them in ways. So, and I think that has a lot to do with being Black. I always tell people, they say, well, you know, I don't know a lot about Islam. I said, almost every Black person I know got at least one Muslim in their family. So you know, if it ain't your real cousin, it's your play cousin, you know, and they, oh, well, I don't like gay people. Everybody got somebody gay in their family, everybody. So why, like that there's such an expansive and generative existence that we have as Black people. And we often try to hide it because we don't want to be shamed, we don't want to be ridiculed, we don't want to be judged. But to me, belonging and Blackness really go hand in hand because, you know, Black people will invite everybody to the table. But a lot of times we don't affirm that within ourselves. So that's one thing that I you know, thank my mother for. My mother's a clinical psychologist. She always ingrained in me the importance of making sure that you don't care what anybody else thinks, but you care what you think. You know, you are the best thing that you have because you came in this world by yourself. You will leave this world by yourself. You have to make sure you constantly affirm yourself.
Snaps. I love that. If I can just, wow. So when you were talking about this expansive view of Blackness and belonging, that really resonates. I mean, I just feel like, and since this is a Black History thing month and we talk about Black people, sometimes our folks, like we can just be so lazy and limited when we're only including certain identities or certain body minds in our comfort zone. And, you know, just what I've learned, even just in this pandemic, these pandemic times are something where I have shifted so much around who I consider my community, my pod, where I'm giving my energy. And, you know, I have started to expand and learn things from people that I was not in association with previously. Like some comrades and I started this little thing called Black Folk Society. And it's just a gathering of Black folks in Oakland to get together and learn about ecology, to learn about the history of Black folks in California, and to learn ways to be in solidarity with Indigenous liberation and with land rematriation. And it's this beautiful gift. And so like I'm suddenly learning about ecology from Black folks. I'm learning um, about about Native sovereignty and about land rematriation. And I pay Shumi tax every year to the Ohlone tribe because I am an occupant on this land. And so I'm learning different ways of being Black and what that means to, and it's an expansive view. And it was something it's new muscle for me. And I embrace it because this is another way of being Black that I haven't experienced before. And so, Angela, I just really love the way you approach Blackness and community, and I think also about like biblical teachings, like who is our neighbor? Everybody's my neighbor. Who do we view as our neighbor? Everybody is my neighbor. Yes, the person whose speech I disagree with. Yes, the person who I have nothing in common with. Yes, the person who whatever. And yes, the people that I am drawn to. So I am continuing to evolve and learn how to expand my definition of Blackness and approach it with curiosity and wonder. So check.
I love that. I love what you're saying too, Yomi, about finding this your pod where you're getting your energy from. And I'm curious if for all of you, so what fuels your healing? What gives you that energy, particularly with respect to your activism sort of across these various sectors?
I can just go quickly. One thing that's been giving me some energy and food lately has been this pandemic joy community that I'm part of, that my comrade Malkia David Cyril has put together. We get together every Sunday and talk about liberation, joy, spirituality. It's sort of like a church. So I get a lot of spiritual food from there, and also from a cleanse community, which is um, rooted in, collective liberation and support. So that's kind of what I've been doing for myself personally, is ways of just getting free for myself, but also to support other people's freedom. And a lot of dancing. I do a lot of dancing by myself with my animal siblings in this house. A lot of music and dancing.
I'll go. What's given me energy, especially during this time of pandemic, and I apologize for all the coughing. I am on the tail end of COVID, so excuse me for that. That was not on cue. The women, and anyone who identifies as woman, right? I don't care if you were born that way, what have you, but the women give me the energy to continue in the work and the activism that I do. I love everything about being a woman. I teach about the divine feminine. I absolutely enjoy sitting in spaces with other women. A lot of people talk about gender segregation in Islam and how did you live in Saudi Arabia and the women couldn't drive. I said, we didn't have to drive. There's a difference between couldn't and didn't have to. I like being dropped off at the front of the restaurant like I'm Beyonce. That's, maybe the only time in my life I might get that privilege, right? But one of the things that I have loved so much is the ability of women to, it's this overused word, but to pivot during this time, and how we have used tools that are at our disposal to congregate. Dr. Melva Sampson has a term called digital hush harbor. And she invited me into conversation. We were on a panel for the Smithsonian. And for the very first time, when she invited me to, engage with her about this concept, for the very first time, I thought about myself as being a woman in ministry. We don't often think about Muslim women as being spiritual leaders or as being, women who have a ministry. But I, in fact, do have a ministry. And that ministry is talking to, relating to, communing with, eating with, dancing with other women. Because of the way that I choose to show up in the world and how I dress, I cannot always express myself publicly in the way that I may want to. But when I'm with other women, I can do anything. And I don't have to feel overburdened by heteronormative patriarchy because we stop that in our spaces. I don't have to feel, overburdened by the need to capitalize on my emotional and physical labor. There is a safeness, a safety, and a comfort and an authenticity that I find when I'm in spaces with other women. Now, that also translates to other people who have access to the divine feminine. So there are certain men within my sphere that I also feel that same safety and comfort with as well. I think one of the things that fuels the work that I do is this deep hope that I have that we can abolish systems of patriarchy and white supremacy and ableism and all of the other things that tear us apart. And I see that in small glimpses when we have, conversations on Zoom, on FaceTime, with people that we're able to see in public. It's that hope that I have that just keeps me going.
I guess I'll jump in. Thank you so much for sharing, all of you. For me, ancestral veneration has become more paramount the older that I get. It's been a mainstay in my life since 2014, but it's taken a life of its own within the last year in terms of honoring my maternal ancestry and understanding that I am them and how I care for myself. I also care for them. And when I care for them, it empowers them to show up in my life in ways that are very palpable. And so that is a tradition that I hold dear. I also experienced the trauma of heteronormative patriarchy in the last position that I had in the church. So I belong to a group of women pastors who have been traumatized within church spaces, which has been really renewing for me. Spending time with the women in my family has been a huge gift. I haven't lived in my hometown of Charlotte in 20 years and just moved back last December. So it's been a great gift to be able to have access to my mother and my sister and aunts, and to participate in family ritual with my immediate family has been really life-giving, as well as having conversations with sister friends like Dr. Melva Sampson, who's a dear friend of mine and colleague, and understanding the importance of, as you mentioned, Angelica, I'm so glad you brought into the space of belonging to yourself first. I think that that has been one reason why I've survived the challenges that I've gone through in the past year by having an internal cultivation of the divine resources that I've been given that sustain me, and tapping into meditation practices and mindfulness practices and Qigong has been really helpful in centering and grounding myself as I continue to support others who also navigate these various systems of oppression.
Thank you so much, Reverend, for bringing that into the space. I will also say ancestor veneration is definitely one of the practices for me as well that has supported my healing and just sustainability throughout the last couple of years, but especially throughout this pandemic. That being said, as far as how I support my well-being, I center my joy. I center my mental, emotional well-being, and that looks like ancestor veneration and also reading, writing. I recently, last couple of months, adopted a meditation practice as well. But most importantly, I continue to surround myself with people who affirm me and uplift me and people who understand me. And that time and time again has been other Black trans people. And so over the last 4 years, I've lived with nothing but other Black trans people. My partner of over 3 years is a Black trans woman. And I work with organizations that are Black trans led. Not only do I run BTTF, or Black Trans Travel Fund, as was previously mentioned, but I'm also a community media organizer for Black Trans Media, which is a collective of Black trans people, an organization that works to shift and reframe the lens and narrative about Black trans people by using media. And we do some really, really amazing and healing work that includes facilitation of a weekly community support space where Black trans folks from all over the country and other countries across the diaspora tune in, and we do are there to support and talk about each other and uplift one another. And I facilitate sometimes what's it called? Not a healing through art space. That was something else I did, but an open mic night where Black trans people from all across the country come in and tune in, and we share our art, we share our talents, and we share space with each other. And that has been the most powerful thing for me, just to be with other Black trans people and for us to celebrate each other. Because as my good friend, Dr. Lord Ashley Hunter often says, every breath a Black trans person takes is an act of liberation. And that rings, and I hold that very close to my heart. And let me also say that, divesting from cis hetero patriarchy is incredibly healing, and that of itself, it gives me the space to show up whole wherever I go. Yeah, I think that about covers it.
Thank you all. I know we're getting questions in and running out of a little bit of time. We do have some live questions coming in, so I'm going to jump to those for our last 15 minutes. The first one is up for Angelica. Well, what made you decide, if you feel comfortable sharing, what made you decide to convert to Islam?
Oh, I think I typed it, but I'll just share it here. There was an instance of spiritual abuse within my church home. And it didn't shake my faith, but it made me feel like I needed to find another church home. And I was a sophomore at the University of Michigan at the time. And since I had access to so much information, I said, well, let me see, how other religions might deal with something like this. And that set me on a quest of searching. And I actually began studying Islam so that I could prove how incorrect it was. Because it was like, Muslims, y'all don't love Jesus. You don't do this, you don't do that. And then I was pleasantly surprised to find, how much Muslims revere Jesus, how much Muslims revere family connections, how much the woman is respected. And it really piqued my curiosity. It took 4 years, but after 4 years' time, I converted to Islam, and I'm still the only Muslim in my family.
Thank you, Angelica. Yomi, we've gotten a few questions that were submitted for you as well. What are some of the barriers you face in advocating for individuals with disabilities, and what suggestions would you have for organizations, companies, individuals who want to join the fight for disability justice?
I would just say that, I think I've talked a little bit about ableism and various barriers already. I would say for any group, organization, company that wants to be serious about incorporating disability justice practices and principles, it would be first to look internally. I would say take some inventory. Are you affirming and supporting the people with disabilities who are currently engaged in your organization, either as volunteers or employees? If you think that you don't have anybody disabled that works in your organization, is it because they don't feel comfortable disclosing that they might have a disability? So I would, engage with some of the DJ trainers around the country. There are so many of us that do this work around program evaluation and diversity and inclusion and belonging type activities. So I would say the first thing is don't start launching some campaign to help disabled people in your organization until you get your house in order. So I think that's step one. And that's a long step. It's a long game, and it takes intentionality.
Thank you, Yomi. Devin, we have an audience member who's wondering, do you feel that you're reaching the white cis hetero community? And if so, do you see a change in their understanding of Black trans folks?
Am I reaching the white cis hetero community? I will say that I'm certain that I am, and also it's not my priority. My priority is never white cis folks, although I know guaranteed there are a lot of allies who follow me on various social media. They have definitely talked about the impact of my work, and especially with the Black Trans Travel Fund, we've gotten a lot of cis folks and white allies who have been, leveraging their resources in an attempt to pour into Black trans communities and support the safety of Black trans women. But that being said, my priority is always reaching other Black, queer, and trans folks. When I'm speaking to Black people. I'm not speaking to cis people. But as I named before, I think with my focus being on Black trans people, that inevitably supports the healing of all people that are around us. I think that white people are also confined by white supremacy. All Black people are and all people are confined by the constraints of this gender binary that was forced onto us by colonization. And so my healing is connected to everyone's healing, and my people, they really are my priority. But I'm happy if my work resonates with others.
Thank you, Devin. Kendra, we have an audience member who's wondering, what are some of the initiatives and efforts that you've seen to be most effective in engaging Black and Brown communities around mental health and accessing mental health services?
We found when I was the executive director at the Hope Center that the facilitators for treatment, one of the biggest was a faith community that was intentional about talking about mental health from the pulpit. And for the pastoral leadership being very vocal about our own intimate experiences with mental health vulnerabilities. I think that that intentionality made people understand that it takes more than prayer. It takes more than using spiritual modalities at times to be able to move into a space of thriving, and that it is a courageous act to be able to sift through some of the pain points of your living experience, to be able to find the power that you can tap into that is within you in partnership with a therapist. Also, another facilitator for treatment was having folks that look like them. I cannot tell you the amount of comments that we would have from people that said that they feel comfortable because we are Black. They felt comfortable, and most of us were predominantly Black women that were on staff at the Hope Center. And people want someone that has cultural competency in terms of the things that they navigate in their day-to-day living experiences. And so that was important. And I believe the hospitable ethos that we created at the Hope Center, so many times people can access mental health resources within institutions and feel dehumanized when they leave out, when they went to go seek support from a place that they felt like they were going to get it from. And I remember having a conversation with the Office of Mental Health in New York, and they were asking us, like, what are you all doing? Because we have a wait list of about 80 folks month to month at the Hope Center, which they had challenges with getting Black and brown people to access resources. And I simply told them, we treat people like human beings. That is the secret. We make people feel loved. We make people feel seen. And I think that that is very important. Some of the things that we were able to do at the Hope Center, because it was free, which was also a big facilitator of treatment. It was free. I don't know anywhere in the country where you can access 10 sessions with a licensed clinician for free, which was really huge. And I think it made the accessibility high. And also I feel like being able to be creative and offer listening sessions to various charter schools in the New York area was something creative that we did, and something that we were able to also do at the church. And these were like 30-minute sessions that only involved my interns and myself doing some really active listening to folks, because so often people can get through a whole day with not being asked, like, really, how are you doing? No, not like the question that to be responded back as good, which is a normal response that people will say is, I'm good. But no, really, how are you doing? So taking 30 minutes to be able to sit with people, also creating mindfulness moments and introducing Black and brown people to mindfulness practices was something that we were able to offer the Harlem community, as well as creating an initiative called Brain Matters, looking at the intersections of neuroscience and spirituality, that I was able to team up with a neurologist and an executive coach who's also an interfaith minister to put on by talking about the magic of our brains and the importance of brain health and neuroscience. And so we were able to do some things like that we found was very helpful in supporting our folks. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, for sure. We only have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask an open-ended question for everyone. Our predominant audience are social workers, social work students, and practitioners and instructors. And we have someone who put in the chat box, they're wondering, what advice would you give social workers around being very mindful and intentional in their practice? And I'm going to tag on in their practice with Black and brown folks.
Can you say that question again, Karma? I'm sorry.
Sure. What advice would you give social workers in being mindful and intentional in their practice, particularly with Black and brown communities?
One of the things that I would suggest is not looking at it from a lens of cultural competence, but cultural humility. We can never be fully competent in someone else's culture, and understanding that Black people are not a monolith. And just because someone may look Black does not mean that you can go about making assumptions about their lives. I think it's important to understand that the people that we are offering services to and support to, they are experts in their lived experience. You are not an expert. So it's important that we listen and allow people to teach us. And sometimes that can cause a bit of confusion, because when we are in the helping fields, we are used to being the one who has the power, but engaging in emotional power sharing with the people that we support and letting them guide us in the ways that we should, perform outreach, perform services for them, I found to be extremely helpful.
I would say I ditto everything Angelica said. I totally agree that changing the power dynamics within therapeutic engagement and social work is so important, because people automatically give us power to have all the answers. And I think that is why I chose to name the folks that come through the doors of the Hope Center as innovators, as opposed to clients or patients, because we can all be innovative in our living experience and how we heal and how we access wholeness. And I only companion with folks to pull out the answers that they already have. That is my belief as a clinician and as a spiritual leader. And I think the other thing that I will offer is to be open to learning new things, be open to not knowing, be open to being challenged, be open to having to refer someone to someone else because you don't have the capacity. Be open to say when you need help. Be open to talk about the ways that you're impacted by those that you give therapy to. Be open to having your own therapist and doing your own healing work as you do the work to supporting others. It's always surprising to me when I come across clinicians who've never been in therapy before, who have not done the personal work of healing that this work calls for. So I would say to take a holistic lens in the way that you approach doing therapy, and know that everybody that comes, this is my personal belief, that everybody that I come across who sits in front of me, I'm a reflection of. And so I always invite myself to do a deeper analysis with every new client that I get, and have the opportunity and the honor to walk alongside.
Yomi or Devin, any final advice for our listeners?
I would say for those going into the field of social work, and I'll just speak from disability community perspective, so many disabled folks have been harmed by the state. They've been harmed by the medical industrial complex, which includes the social work community. And so if you want to not be part of that harm, not to perpetuate that harm, I would, think deeply about, like, what stories do you tell yourself about people? What stories do you tell yourself about disabled folks? What stories do you tell yourself about people who have mental health disabilities, who have psychiatric disabilities, who have intellectual and developmental disabilities? What stories do you tell yourselves about people who have physical disabilities? What do you think of when you hear the term high functioning and low functioning? These are made up terms. They don't mean anything. So so I will disabuse you of even, and I hope you don't ever use them again. Go forth and sin no more. They mean nothing. But think about what do you tell yourself about these terms, about language? How do you speak about disability? What is your comfort level? Do you use trash terms like differently abled? and handy capable. That kind of stuff. Disability is not the dirty word. We can deal with these terms with the conversation upfront, directly. We don't have to try to invisibilize disability by couching it in these other kinds of terms, or telling people, I don't even see your disability. That's like saying, I don't even see that you're Black. Really? So you're not seeing me, and we can't have this conversation. So I would say if you're going into the field of social work and your thinking is that you're going to be helping people to navigate, I would say refer back to Angelica's very gorgeous and generous view of emotional sharing. And to what Kendra was just talking about being in relationship with people. So I work in healthcare, that's my day job. And, the way that I train and engage in education with our providers is around being in a therapeutic relationship. So I'm in a relationship with my doctor, with my therapist, with any practitioner, and it's a mutuality. It's not a one-way thing. And that's how also you kind of level out that power dynamic. So I would say start with the stories that you tell yourself about people. And why do you think that way?
I know we're at time, but Devin, any closing advice for our listeners?
Sure, I'll keep it super short since we're over time. Well, I do definitely want to affirm everything that everyone has already said, definitely echoing it. And also I would just say to not make assumptions, like stop making assumptions about people's identities, people's presentations. I think that a lot of times as people that are working in social work or just like in where you're providing a service to community, people tend to have these internal biases and like assuming people's pronouns based on the way that they're presenting. Just because you see someone who is masculine presenting doesn't mean they have he, him pronouns, or feminine presenting doesn't mean they use she, her pronouns. So like also making space for people to show up as their whole selves. So how do you introduce yourselves when you're meeting a new client? Are you providing your own pronouns? Are you making space for them to be comfortable with sharing theirs? So like just being more mindful about your own biases and working every day to work through those and making space to, just like be a better ally, or rather, I don't really believe in allies, be a better comrade.
I love that. I like to say I'm looking for accomplices in this work. It's usually how I refer to Chris. So I am so honored, so grateful, so humbled, and I'm sure you're seeing the chat and all the appreciation and gratitude that is coming to you all for this space. Collectively, this has been a truly healing space for me today, and I just want to send my thanks to all of you for accepting our invitations to share your wisdom. You are so appreciated, and this was such a gift. And I want to thank our audience members for being here. The session was recorded. We will be getting it captioned, and once it is live and posted on our website, we'll send out an email to both our panelists and also all of our registrants. So thank you all again, and have a great afternoon. Or great morning, Angelica, I'm sorry.
Bye, everyone.
And be well, Angelica, sending you some healing thoughts.
Be well, Angelica. Talk to you all soon.
Bye.